Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Happy Taco Tuesday. It's really funny because the music on my countdown timer, my 11-year-old made that for me. He made it in GarageBand. I've had different types of music on, the show, if that's what we're going to call our weekly live together. I've had different music and at different times, like I'll get like a ding on YouTube. It's like, oh, you can't use this music, even though I had like done all the things that I thought were right to be able to use the music. It was like, nope, shut down, can't, don't, no, you're not supposed to be using this. So I started using the music that my son created for me, and I love it. So, hello. Yeah. Leah says, wow, well done to your 10-year-old. Yeah. I mean, I'm like, is he going to be a DJ? Is this something because he just like opened up GarageBand and he like started doing all these things. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing or how you're doing this, but I'm going to use this on my podcast. And then I started using it on the podcast. And then I thought, well, why don't I just use it on my live videos too? So yeah, I'm excited. Yeah. Hi, Leah. So hello, Leah from the UK is here. Everybody else, like tell me where you're watching from. If you're watching on the replay, let us know. I always love giving y'all shout outs. Today, I'm so excited. So we are talking about, let me turn this off here. So we're talking about how to use your podcast backlog. This is something that we're talking about on the podcast today. So if you're a regular listener, you know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who are brand new here, welcome. I am Crystal. I teach entrepreneurs all about how to start, launch, and market their podcast. And this is my show. Oh, did I do it? Oh, I almost did it. Maybe I should just do it like this when I know it's just like up and down. I try to do the point and it's always opposite and then I get weird. But yeah. So this is my show. This is the Profit Podcast, and it's something that I have been doing for 3 years, y'all. Like we are about to celebrate our 3-year anniversary of the podcast. Now, let me like rewind. It's going to be 2 years of the Profit Podcast. We were actually another podcast previously. We rebranded and started just becoming obsessed with all things podcasting. I feel like if this was a drinking game, everybody would be trashed right now because I've said podcast about 1 million times. So yes. Hey girl, so happy you're here. I was going to call you Miranda. Oh, so happy that you're here. Okay, listen. So she has the Mediocre Mom Show. So a new episode's out. My first interview. Oh, so excited for you. So that's awesome. I think that whenever you switch up from just solo episodes to having an interview, it's really fun. And I love to hear what your audience has to think too. So if you've previously done solo episodes, ask your audience, hey, what did you think about today? Like we switched things up and we decided to do an interview and let me know what you think. So it's always a great opportunity when you try a new format, whether it's from solo to interview or if it's a longer episode or a shorter one. Maybe you typically do an hour long and then you're like, I think I'm going to try a 20-minute episode. Let's see what happens. Or you do a 20-minute episode and you're like, I think I'm going to try a 5-minute episode. My good friend Heather Sager, she has the Heather Sager Show, and she recently started doing 5-minute episodes on Mondays. She was like, I want to do like a Monday motivation episode. And so I'm curious to see what her, like, how's that going to go? Like, what is that going to look like for your audience? So anytime you try something new, always ask your people, can I get some feedback? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did it work well into your listing schedule? All the things. So always be asking questions. That's the best way to learn from your audience and understand what they really want. So hi, Lori. Lori's in the house. Oh, y'all, this is so fun. I can't wait to talk about this. So your podcast backlog. How can we use this strategically? So the whole episode today, and it's not a long one. I'm looking at how long it is right here. I can actually pull this up. So it's only 27 minutes. It's not a long episode. You like pop in your AirPods, your earbuds, going on a drive today. Listen to it. It's not very long, But I really go into what your backlog is, and very short, it's just all of your episodes. It's any episode that has already been published. And I really go into how it doesn't mean that you can't listen to this episode if you haven't launched, right? Because there's a lot of people, I know this, especially on YouTube and our Facebook group, and just anyone that listens to the podcast, a lot of you are still formulating your podcast. You actually haven't launched, or you have launched, but you've only been podcasting for a very short amount of time. Today's episode is not for you to take action. It's not for you to say, oh my gosh, I already have to start thinking about my backlog. No, it is an episode I want you to listen to and think, how can I use this in the future? How can, in 3 to 6 months from now, when I have, 20 episodes or more, how can I say, this is how I want to use this content now? Because here's my little secret, right? Like, we are on episode 247 of the Profit Podcast. I have reused, I can't even tell you how many pieces of content over and over and over and over again, and you may or may not even notice. So if you're an avid listener of the show, maybe you know, oh, I've heard her talk about this before, or oh, I already know what she's going to say on this one thing because I've heard it a few other times on the podcast. So there's nothing that is absolutely groundbreaking in every single episode of the podcast, but the point is to use it strategically. That's really what we're talking about, because I've seen other podcasts where they do, like, it's almost like cyclical, like a few times a year, they'll talk about the same thing and it's the same story. It's the same story every time. And then it's like, what's new about this? Why do I keep coming back to this if you're just going to tell us the same thing over and over and over again? Why not instead you put a different spin on it? Or you can curate different playlists. This is something that I was really excited to talk about, because it's not something that I have done in a way that I talked about on the show. This might sound a little confusing. It's like a theoretical idea that I've seen other podcasters do really well that I would like to do more of in the future for the Profit Podcast. Now, specifically, that's curated playlist. What does that mean? It means that there are certain categories of the Profit Podcast that are either related to growing a business with your podcast, or having interviews, or doing solo shows. Like, right? All of those are under the umbrella of podcasting, but then you can go a layer deeper. And I could create, much like on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see there are videos for solo podcasters. There are videos for interviews. There's videos for just launching. There's videos for equipment. You can curate playlist of videos on YouTube, and you can do the same thing with your podcast. Now, it's not as easy to do it in the sense of just going into your Buzzsprout account. If you're brand new around here, you don't know what Buzzsprout is. This is the podcast host provider that I use. So it's where I take my audio files and I upload them to Buzzsprout, and then they distribute my podcast to Apple Podcasts, Google, like all the players, I was going to say players and places at the same time, but they distribute it out. And so while I can't necessarily do curated playlists, like in what I'm talking about, like how it is on YouTube, you could do some really fun things if you have your own podcast website, or if you wanted to create a lead magnet that's just like a Google Doc, right? You could take a Google Doc and say, of the last 3 months, what are some episodes that I could group together, right? So I know Lori here, she has a travel podcast that she's working up. I'm excited for her to launch it really soon. But what if Lori, because I know she lives in Canada, if she wanted to group together some of her podcast episodes after they're out and about, maybe they are specific to international travel, or traveling during a certain time of year, or it's traveling alone or traveling with your spouse. Like, you could do different categories of your podcast, put them in a Google Doc or a Google Sheet or however you wanted to create it, a pretty template in Canva. And then you could create what is known as a lead magnet to grow your email list. So on your podcast, you could say, hey, if you want to hear our top 5 episodes about traveling to traveling to Texas, right? Because Lori, you're going to have to come see me in Texas at some point. Traveling to Texas from Canada in the middle of the summer, right? Because it's hot here in Texas. I'm sure it's 1,000 times hotter than it is in Canada. So it's like how to be prepared for it. Here are 4 episodes where we talk about what it's like to travel to Texas, or what it's like to travel to Arizona, or, somewhere that's a southern state. This is what you need to do to be prepared. I'm totally making this up on the fly. So if it makes sense, I hope it's making sense here, but you could curate playlist and then create a free lead magnet, something you'd put on your website or something you'd advertise on your podcast, where I'm going to be getting a lot more into self-sponsored ads, even more, even though I feel like that's my love child. I love, love, love talking about self-sponsored ads on your podcast. But you could absolutely say, hey, if you're interested in this podcast episode is sponsored by our curated playlist for the avid traveler that's looking, I don't know, it's a fluffy title, right? I'm making this up. But then you could have this beautiful curated list that you can send to your people. And all it is it's clickable links where they would know, go to this episode. It's going to have the resources you need. It's going to have the things to listen to that will help you in your journey. So that's kind of a long-winded way of explaining some of the higher level things that we get into in today's episode. But I just wanted to touch on that because I think that using your podcast backlog strategically, that is the word to use, strategically, is going to make you a better content creator and help you really get the most mileage out of every single piece of content. Actually, I think that this podcast episode was inspired by a question, and this is where most of my just total transparency, y'all. I get ideas all the time. And this happens when you get your podcast going and people start asking you questions about the topic that you have. I know mine's super meta. It's podcasting about podcasting about podcasting. I get that. I know it's very layered and very, very super focused, but I get questions all the time. And one of them was exactly what inspired today's episode. And it was what do I do with all the stuff I've already published? How do I reinvigorate, re-energize, make sure people know that content is there, especially if you've been podcasting for 6 to 12 months. You may have some really awesome episodes and you want to encourage people to go back and listen to them. Maybe you answered a common question that you get a lot and you're go back and listen to episode 4 or episode 22 because I go into depth on this one specific topic. So I hope that helps. Y'all let me know if y'all have any questions. I think that when it comes to just content in general, it just makes me so excited to share with you the ways that I continue to create new pieces of content because I know that a lot of you struggle with this. You tell me that this is something that you struggle with on a regular basis, is coming up with content, creating content. How do I keep talking about the important things that I know my audience needs to know without boring them, without repeating myself, and without just feeling like a broken record, right? I know that these are all things that you're experiencing. These are all things that I experienced. I mean, let's face it, when it comes to podcasting, I feel like I could talk about a million things and I could have 5 lifetimes of things to talk about with podcasting, but not everybody feels that way. And I do understand that this is a superpower that I feel like I've harnessed, and I want to share these ideas with you, these strategies with you, so you can kind of unlock the content monster that's like holding all of your thoughts captive. Because usually what happens is you just need to tap a little bit lower, like just get a little bit deeper, one more level of your content in order to kind of break open all the ideas that are swirling around in your head, right? Because I'm sure on a regular basis, like if you have a podcast, you're creating a podcast, you always have ideas like right there. You're like, oh, that'd be good to talk about. But then you forget it, or you didn't write it down, or you forgot to like say it out loud so that you would remember to write that down next time you were around a pen, or you could tell your phone, whatever it is. So, I just love talking about creating content. So if you have any questions, post them below. We are open for some questions. So type Q in front and ask your questions below. Okay, y'all, this is so funny. So type a Q in the front. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Y'all always do this. I meant to do this. One day I'll get this all where it's working. Oh, there we go. So you can go to crystalprofit.com. Y'all, I misspelled episode. Why didn't y'all tell me? I'm just sitting here chatting. I totally misspelled episode. There we go. Okay. I need an autocorrect on my life. I need a spell check on everything that I do because I feel like it doesn't always come out correctly. So let me know what questions you have. Type them below. Okay. So how to change ideas to podcast for listeners. So I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Is it Prathika? So tell me if I'm saying that correctly. So how to change ideas to podcast for listeners. Now, is this in reference to like a different piece of content you've already created and you want to turn it into a podcast episode? I'm thinking of like a blog post or a YouTube video, and then you want to change it to a podcast for your listeners. I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. So yes, ma'am. So is that to your name or is that to the question? Give me a little clarifying information so I can make sure that I'm answering this correctly, because I'm assuming it's how to change the ideas to a podcast for your listeners. This could be a multi-layered answer, because if let's just assume it was previously a blog post, you can take that blog post and use it as the outline, right? Because people always ask me, how do you script an episode? How do you outline an episode? You could use your blog as the outline for your podcast. And it's totally fine. I get asked all the time, like, can I really just reuse the same information, like blog form, and turn it into a podcast? Absolutely. Absolutely. I've done this so many times. If you watch my YouTube channel and you listen to the podcast and you see what I post on social media, you will see that it's all repurposed. It's just I create content specific to that platform. So a great example is tomorrow I'm putting out a YouTube video. I was going to say a podcast episode, a YouTube video that is very similar to a podcast episode I released last week. I did a podcast episode about a limited time series podcast, what it is, and I go into all the details. And that episode was probably 30 minutes long. Now I'm taking that exact same content and I'm catering it to YouTube, and I created a video, which I knew needed to be shorter. I didn't need a 30-minute long YouTube video about the same topic. So maybe I stripped some of the content out. I reduced it down to what was just necessary for someone to watch on YouTube. And that's how I've taken that piece of content and just spun it up. So yeah, I mean, Patrika, let me know. I'm like throwing in an extra R, I feel like. So Prathika, I'm going to get this right, I promise. Prathika, let me know what type of content you're starting with. If it's a blog, if it's a video, if it's a social post, whatever it is. And then I can throw some more ideas at you onto how you can turn that into a podcast episode. But yeah, I think that, I mean, even if you're just starting with a question that someone asks you, like that's absolutely, I mean, if you listen to the podcast, you've probably heard me say, I get asked all the time. I kind of got annoyed with myself the other day because I heard myself saying this in my YouTube videos. I get asked all the time, and then I enter, like I slipped in the little question, then I get, but it's true. Like this is where so much of my content comes from, y'all. I get asked these questions in my Instagram DMs, in Facebook groups that I'm a part of, in emails that I get from people. Like I get all of these questions and I just collect them. I have a running list of content ideas, and sometimes I will like drop in the person's name who asked the question. Sometimes I will reference them. Sometimes I'll like give a shout out to one of my peers or one of my students and say, hey, this person had this awesome question. Here's what it is. Here's my thoughts on it. And I think that that's a great way for you to structure your podcast if that's how your podcast is set up. Because I know not everyone watching right now, everyone listening is like creating content the way that I am. My podcast is educational. Like literally I am in the education how to podcast category in Apple Podcast for my show because I'm educating. Not everyone's doing that. Some people are just telling stories. Some people are just being silly. Some people, it's just a hobby for them right now. So some of the ways that I present content and material to you is really meant to just be a jumping off point. It's to, like I said earlier, get those creative juices flowing of how should I be using this? How should I be doing that? What is a great way for me to, take this one idea and turn it into something that will work for me and my audience? So I hope that you can just get some ideas from all the content that we're creating, and I hope that it just kind of sparks a little bit of that creativity. So Leah has a question. Hi, Crystal. What would you recommend as an easy way to create videos to share your podcast on YouTube if you don't actually record live videos of yourself when making the podcast? Oh, this is such a great question, Leah. So there's a few ways. Now, I need to go back and see because I had recorded live videos of me recording the podcast and it was kind of just a hot mess, to be really honest. So I'm kind of glad, like, it's different if you're really good on live video. I'm not always great on live video. I feel like I stumble a lot more over my words when I'm recording live because I'm looking, like, here's my webcam. I'm looking directly into the webcam. I have this ring light. Like I have to make sure that I'm looking at you. I'm engaging with you because that's the whole point of live video. So I like that you're not trying to do it because what I have found, y'all, if you know, I have all my little notebooks. And let me give you a great example of this. And I promise I'm going to answer your question. But I want to show you when I am recording, where is it? I had an episode the other day that I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to do this. Okay. So like these are all my notes, right? Like this is, if you haven't seen this yet, like this is how I planned all of my stuff, right? And I do my little bubble letters and I'll have my thing. I have to look at this. So whenever I'm recording and I'm like, okay, I'm recording the podcast and I look like this. Like this is what I typically look like when I'm recording a podcast. I'm not looking directly at the camera because it's too much. It's too much. Like that's just flat out. It is too much. If you want to record great audio, you got to do this. If you want to record great video, you got to look this way. And so, yeah, that's my 2 cents. It's hard to do a live video podcast and not kind of fumble over your words. So back to your question. That was a long-winded like rant right there. Yeah, I feel the same when I record live. Okay, good. We are totally on the same page here. Okay, so back to your question. What would you recommend as an easy way to create videos to share your podcast on YouTube if you don't actually record live? So it depends on what kind of style video you're trying to create. I don't know if y'all know this, but my videos that I upload on YouTube, I record them on my phone. I do. I have a super fancy camera that I've used as my webcam. I haven't figured out how to use it well enough to work it with my software. And like, I'm just comfortable recording on my phone, and I use iMovie to edit, and I do everything right there on my phone. So, Leah, if that's an option for you to set up your phone, like maybe if you have the same kind of posture where you have your microphone and you have your notes, you can just tell people that would be watching the video, like, hey, I'm going to be looking at my notes. Or, if you look at your notes and then you go back to record, maybe you can cut that. If you don't want that in your video, again, it goes back to your style and how you want to have your videos look. But another thing that you could do is if you have a webcam, you can have it turned on, and it's just you, so you don't have to worry about looking a certain way or like looking into the camera. Look off at your notes. It may require more editing if you want to cut those pieces of the video out. Leah, let me know how long you are thinking about these episodes being, and that would be like the videos. How long would you want your videos to be? Are they going to be clips that you're just going to share on social media? Are there going to be, because I know you said you're going to upload them to YouTube, but is it just going to be like a teaser, and then you're going to upload this teaser video to YouTube and then send them to your podcast? Or are you uploading the entire thing? I know I'm giving you like 20 questions, but I'm curious because it would really depend on how long it is, how much video editing this is going to require of you. Are you a video editor? Do you feel comfortable doing it? Are you going to outsource it? Because, or do you not care? Like, do you not care that you're not like looking direct to camera, that you can look off to the side while you're recording? Let's pretend that this was my, I'm recording, like this is my podcast, and I'd be looking down at my notes and I would be saying all the things, but I wouldn't be looking direct to camera. So let me know, and I can help kind of steer you in the way of like other recommendations. But you could use Zoom. If you have access to Zoom, you could record it on Zoom and then download it and then use it as a podcast, because you can strip the audio out of Zoom. And you could also, because you could just open up Zoom and hit record. You don't have to have anybody else in the room with you. I'm trying to think. So yeah, let me know the answers to those. How long is it going to be? Are you uploading a full podcast episode? And then I can kind of steer you in the right direction. So Prathika says, yes, you answered my question. Specifically, my question was individual ideas of life experience is the main idea. Now, how to structure that into a podcast. So individual ideas. So I'm thinking of like a personal journey podcast, and individual ideas of life experience is the main idea. So is this podcast, I'm like trying to say your name correctly. Prathika. There we go. Prathika. I want to throw in an extra R that isn't there. I don't know why. So I would say, if this is like a personal journey podcast, that's what it sounds like. Individual ideas of life experience, how to structure that into a podcast. You have to ask yourself, who's listening? Is it other people that have shared these same life experiences as you? Like, here's an example. Like, I'm a mom. So am I sharing stories about being a mom to other moms? Am I sharing life experiences of being a mom to people who want to become moms, who are empty nesters that have been moms and now their kids have moved away? Like, you've got to find something that really anchors the idea, because I like the idea of life experiences. And I've listened to plenty of podcasts that have, like personal development and motivation, and they share their own stories and their life experiences, but there's still like one main idea that's anchored. So people know, because like it's too broad. That's really what it is. What it all comes down to. It's very broad, individual ideas of life experience. So structuring that into a podcast, the first thing I would recommend is niching it down to, well, what is a life experience? Like, what are you quantifying what a life experience is like? Is it overcoming something, overcoming a traumatic experience? Is it An experience of traveling the world? Is it an experience of going to school, getting an education? Is it an experience like there's? Do you see what I'm saying? Like those are like the umbrella of the ideas. Like if you were here earlier, we were talking about like you have podcasting, and then you have solo podcast, individual podcast. You have all the solo and interview. That's what I meant to say, not solo and individual. You get what I'm saying, right? Okay, we're on the same page. But you want to have the umbrella, like the main idea, because life experience, like anyone that's a human, like and they're on this planet, they have a life experience, so it's way too general. You need to really niche it down to something that people can say, "Oh, they made that podcast for me." Oh, that yes, this is the podcast I have been waiting for because it's life experience stories that I have been wanting to know more about. Or this is me. I see myself in these stories. You want people to have that reaction to your content, and just having general life experiences isn't something that is really going to draw someone in. So I hope that helps. I hope that it helps. Relatively short, about half an hour. I think I can get away with not looking direct at the camera all the time. Yeah. And that's, again, I think that I've looked at so many different creators over doing my YouTube and doing the podcast that everyone has their own style. So some people are like, oh, it's easy to just record your podcast and look direct to camera. Y'all, I look at my notes. I don't know if you know this about me, but I look at my notes, whether they're a post-it note, whether it's like a long like outline, if it's written in my planner, if it's written on the whiteboard, I look at my notes. I don't just totally go off the cuff and don't look at anything. So it would be challenging for me to not have to look at my notes as well. But yeah, so I like hearing you say that. So about half an hour, and I do look at my notes a lot. Okay, yeah. So I think that like just starting that way and just delivering your content the way you're going to deliver it will be a lot easier. And maybe even in the future, you're like, oh, I won't have to look at my notes. But I mean, it doesn't matter, honestly. Like it doesn't matter how you deliver your content as long as you're being authentic to you and it's not hard. Like I love hearing you say like, I look at my notes a lot. I wasn't planning on doing direct camera because that is like, it makes my shoulders relax a little bit, that you don't have this expectation of like, I'm going to sit down, totally look at the camera, never have to look at anything. And then if you weren't able to do that, you'd be frustrated. So I like hearing this. Let me know if you have any other questions about this, but I'm excited. I think that this could be really awesome. The one thing that I would recommend is when you're recording, to really cater to one medium over the other. Now I'm going to explain this because I know you're like, what are you talking about? Because you are recording two separate mediums. Because on YouTube, people typically want direct to camera, they want tangible takeaways. And on a podcast, you have more freedom to share stories and embellish a little bit. So I would really focus on, okay, I'm delivering this as a podcast episode first, and I just so happen to be recording my YouTube video as well. Or I'm recording this as a YouTube video that I'm going to turn into a podcast episode. Does that make sense? Because you do need to prioritize one over the other simply because it will make it easier for you to repurpose the content whichever way you're going to do it. But like a great example is for my podcast episodes, I do embellish a lot more. I tell more stories. I feel like I can go on more tangents. I feel like I can be freer because it's an audio experience. Like y'all don't care if I tell more stories. Like you like it when I go deeper. But I have had so many comments on my YouTube channels where I do a 12-minute video instead of an 8-minute video. And people are like, you're just now getting to the point. Like, why did I even watch this for the first 4 minutes? Because you're just telling a story. So you have to know what your audience wants on the different platforms and how you can cater them. So I'm excited. I want you to come back and tell us, tell this how it all works out. Yeah. You're really structured and clear in your podcast and in your answers to questions. Well done. Well, thank you so much. And I'm so happy that you're here. These were great questions today, but I want to know how this works. Like, you'll have to report back to us and tell us what recording that first podcast, the video podcast was like, and what you learned from it. Cause I think everybody has different experiences too. And this is where I get all nerdy and geeky. I'm like, I want to know what happened. Like, how did it turn out? Did it work well? Or were you like, oh, I learned so many things. This was a terrible experience. Or this was a fantastic experience. You'll have to tell us. Yeah, perfect answer. We'll niche down. Call me Pinku. Okay, I like that. Pinku. Making it easier for you. Thanks for elaborating it for my understanding. Yeah. So I really think that niching down not only makes it easier for your audience, but it kind of helps you self-select on what life experiences you would want to share, right? So like you can kind of take your entire life, if you will, and I'm not sure how old you are, but you look at your entire life and you're like, okay, this is a great story, but it might not be relatable to my audience. Or this is an awesome story, and I know how I can take a piece of it, not the whole story, but a piece of it, and my audience would so appreciate it. So it helps you self-select what content is important and what's not, and what's relevant and relatable, and how you can use it for your audience. So yeah, these are great questions. Great questions. Okay, so Eric is here. Okay. Eric says, about how long do you wait before repurposing a piece of content? This depends. Let me see, I'm trying to think of what particular topic it was, but I have actually gone through where I was teaching 3 like high level points in one episode. And then probably not even a month later, I went really like deep strategically on each one of those 3 points in 3 separate episodes. So if that was your idea, so let's say, I'm looking outside now. So how to grow a tree, right? We're just going to take something super general. How to grow a tree in 3 easy steps. Okay, you're going to want to find the perfect tree for your yard. That's 1. Then you're going to make sure you have the right soil. That's 2. And then this is how you're going to water and take care of it, right? This was a 15-minute episode, let's say. You're going to tell about your experience, why you wanted to plant a tree, why you picked the one that you did. You're going to keep it really high level. And then for 3 episodes after that, if you wanted to, and even throughout that whole episode, you could say, we're just going to keep everything really high level, but in the next series, I'm going to be teaching you why I really chose this one and what the experience was like in purchasing this tree and why it meant so much to me. And then in the next episode, I'm going to go into the scientific explanation of why the soil is the way that it is here in Texas and specifically in Houston. And then the third one is I'm going to tell you how you can get your family involved in taking care of this tree and what it's going to teach your kids about responsibility. Do you see what I'm saying? So you could take a very broad topic, like let's say you talk about something like growing a tree in your backyard. I know it's super general, just stay with me here. But you talk about growing a tree and then you realize you left something out. I get this all the time. So many people will tell me, I published an episode and I realized I left out a super important piece. Or there's just something like someone asked a follow-up question after you published it and you're like, oh crap, why didn't I say this? This is such an important point. I should have mentioned this in my podcast episode. So I think that if that happens, you can turn around and do an episode the next week if you wanted to. I don't think that there's necessarily a period of time that you have to wait. I think it just depends on how you're going to repurpose a piece of content. Now, that's for podcast episodes. YouTube videos, let's just say let's instead of a YouTube video, let's talk about the live, right? I'm going live on YouTube and on Facebook right now. If I wanted to, I could repurpose this piece of content in some way. I could take it down, strip down the audio. I could take pieces of it and share it on social media. I could take the audio and use it as a bonus podcast episode. But let's just call it what it is. Today's live video is already being repurposed from today's podcast episode. It's where the whole thing started. Like, I went live today to talk about today's podcast episode, and now we just happen to be in the Q&A portion of what I typically do at the end. But the episode went live today, and I'm already repurposing it for other pieces of content. So don't feel like you have to wait a certain amount of time. Just ask yourself, how do I want to repurpose this? What is the purpose of repurposing this, right? Is it to reach a new audience? Is it to kind of hit your audience, hit the point really home? Because I have found that there is a good chunk of my audience that listens to every single one of my podcast episodes, and that's where they are. They're not on social media. They don't watch my YouTube videos. They might read my emails, but they are like, I'm an avid podcast listener. Anything you put on a podcast, I listen to it. Then I have people that just watch me on YouTube, and they don't listen to all of my podcast episodes. Maybe they pick and choose which ones they want, but on YouTube, they're more of like, I'm here to get my specific question answered. Okay, I went and saw the videos that I needed to see. And then they go to the podcast. They're like, I just want to get my specific questions answered. So you have to really understand why you're repurposing, who you're repurposing to. Is it a brand new audience, or is it the same audience? You're just hitting them in a different way. So I hope that sounded like a really, really long answer. I hope I answered your question. But yeah, there's not a certain amount of time you have to wait until you repurpose a piece of content. That's just my opinion. So yeah, I hope that helped. So wanting to venture into podcast, where or what should a beginner start with? Perfect the script or hit the record with autoflow. Okay, so this is a really, really good question. I'm excited that you're excited about, trying out podcasting. My recommendation would be to throw the idea of perfecting the script out the window, okay? Because you will always have something you want to change about the script. Or maybe you start recording and you're like, oh my gosh, I just remembered this awesome story, but it wasn't in the script, so I can't say it. I never want you to have that. It's like that creative block where you can't really have flow, like you're talking about, like the auto flow. You want to be able to speak freely on your, behind the microphone in a way that you feel confident. So my recommendation would be to sit down and actually do some planning. I know it sounds kind of boring, but I'm a pen and paper girl. I love my notebooks. I love a Google Doc, something that's very simple, a whiteboard. I have a whiteboard over here that I'm just like, oh, an idea hit me, and I'll just get after it with the whiteboard. But I would recommend you get some ideas out of your head that you would want to talk about, then sit down, put together a rough outline or a script, but then hit record. Just hit record and have the idea that I can throw this away. It's probably not going to be great the first time you hit record. That is okay. It was not great for me. I messed up way too many times that I even want to admit whenever I first sat down to record, because I was terrified. I actually have a video that I'm going to be putting out soon that anxiety behind hitting the record button is real. And everybody experiences it on some level when they sit down to record, because you're just like, okay, do I start talking now? Okay, wait, does it sound okay? Is my voice okay? Am I too loud? Am I too soft? Do I need to get closer to the mic? Do I need to hang on, maybe I need to stand up. Maybe, wait, what were my notes? Oh, wait, I said that wrong. I need to stop. Hang on. There's so many ideas that go through your head when you first hit record. So I want you just to feel comfortable sitting behind your microphone, speaking into the mic. So maybe your very first step is to plan a few episodes, get a few ideas out, and then sit behind your microphone and just start talking. Not with the expectation that it's going to be your first podcast episode or that anybody is ever going to listen to it. It's just the idea of, I need to feel comfortable behind this microphone because I don't know what I'm doing. We all have to start somewhere. If you've listened to the podcast, if you've been around here for a while, you know the motto is keep it up We all have to start somewhere because we do. I didn't know how to do any of this before I started. I just got in there, started doing it. I figured things out, what I like, what I don't like. And that's really what has transformed every piece of content that you see here. So I hope that that helped. Yeah, just getting started, and just know it's probably never going to be perfect. And that's okay. That's okay. It's totally fine. Yeah. Thank you for your help. I'll be sure to let you know how it goes, Crystal. Yes, Leah. Like, I'm going to, like, your homework is due. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to make sure, we're going to check back exactly in 2 weeks and see. I would love for you to come back and tell us how it worked, because that's exciting. I love when people try new things that, I've told you my experience and what I've had, but I would love to hear your experience and what it's like. So come back, report back. Thanks, great info. I was more thinking about reusing content so that you can take a vacation for a week or two without losing your audience. Okay, so I have thoughts on this, and I am not a huge fan of someone taking, so let's say you wanted to take the month of July off, right? We're in April, July is coming up pretty soon. So let's pretend that you wanted to take, you're like, I need a vacation. I need to just step away from the podcast for a while. Instead of just taking a piece of content and re-airing it, as a listener of a lot of podcasts, I don't like it when people do this, because it's like, I've already heard this. I listen to all these, like, why? I'm an avid listener of your show. I love all the content that you're putting out. I've already heard this. This is not exciting for me. This is not new for me. It's not fun for me. So unless it's repurposed in a fun new way, where maybe you took like 4 or 5 pieces of different episodes and put them all together into one, maybe I would listen to that. But what I would suggest, instead of, actually, Eric, I have a YouTube video that's all about taking time off of your podcast that you should check out. I have a podcast episode about it as well. But if you're looking to take time off, I would recommend instead create short episodes. Go in. If your episodes are typically, I'm just going to throw a number out there. If they're typically 30 to 45 minutes, shorten them to 10 or 15 and say, hey, like, we're taking the month of July off. I'm going to spend it with my family. I'm going to travel, like whatever it is that you're going to do. And you can say, we're just going to get super strategic and, share a few things. It's y'all, okay, precursor to what's happening this summer. I take the whole summer off of doing interviews. I don't do any interviews in the summer. So if you hear one aired on my show, it was recorded in April or May or possibly even March, right? So I'm airing episodes as I do them, but then I take the whole summer off. And what I'm planning to do this summer is create really short episodes. You're not going to see the same 45-minute, hour-long episodes, because I'm going to be really busy this summer. I have 3 kids. They're all going to be home. They have sports camps and they have stuff that they're going to be doing. And I want to spend time with them while they're at home, right? You only get so many summers with your kids. And I'm realizing that as my oldest one is going into middle school next year. I'm like, oh my gosh, we only have so many more summers with him. So I'm going to be taking time off, in that I'm going to be shortening all my episodes, but I'm still going to be putting out episodes every single week. So instead of like repurposing old pieces of content, like where you're just uploading them again, an avid listener of your show is going to be a little disappointed, because they're going to say, I've already heard this. I've already listened to this. I'm really not that much into it. Like, I'm not excited about it. But if you put up a new piece of content that is shorter, or that it has a different kind of format, people could get excited about that, even if it's shorter. They're like, oh, I can't wait until Eric puts out his new episode next week, because I bet it's going to be really good. And I typically see when someone re-airs an episode that their numbers are not what they were the first time. So let's pretend that you aired an episode 6 months ago and it did really well. When you re-air it, the numbers probably won't be as much, simply because people have already heard it. So just some things to keep in mind, some things to consider. But I would definitely go watch, let me see. I think I have it right here. Take time off. I'm looking up this episode because I don't know what number it is, but I'm going to find it for you. Let me see. Everything runs so slow whenever I'm live. So, okay, here it is. How to take time off from your podcast. This is actually a podcast episode that I did around the holidays. Was it last year? I think it was. Yeah. So it's episode 203 of the Profit Podcast. Let me make this smaller because I don't know if you can see that. Hang on. Let me take this off. There we go. So how to take time off your podcast. Eric, go listen to this because it says like right here, 3 main reasons: holidays, vacations, or you just need a break. And it's going to have some really great takeaways. This one, it's like 34 minutes. So I would go listen to this before you think about re-airing an old episode of content, because I think that you'll find some ideas of how you can approach it differently than just either not showing up at all or re-airing an old episode. So that's my take on that. So I will also come back for sure, and shout out to Crystal in my first episode. Yay! That's awesome. Yes, I'm so excited. Y'all get me so excited when y'all say y'all are going to be starting your shows soon. This is so fun. I live for this, y'all. Your motto is so reassuring. Yes, we all have to start somewhere. Like, it's the absolute truth. Like, everyone that presents themselves as an expert as a podcaster, like, I did not go to school for journalism. I was not in broadcasting. I'm not on the radio. I didn't do any of that stuff. And it showed in my first year of my podcast because I didn't know what I was doing. But I figured it out along the way. I kept showing up. I was like, we all got to start somewhere. And like, that was my life motto forever. And it continues to be as I try new things. I'm still like, we all got to start somewhere. It's going to be crappy when you first do it. But I love my friend Melanie. She has a great saying. She's like, scrappy doesn't have to be crappy. And I love it so much because it's so true. Like, if you're here, if you're watching this right now, like, you are trying to do it in an easier way, in a faster way, and in a better way than just doing it by yourself. So you're already like in a community of people who are trying to figure it out and trying to understand the best way that they can create their show. So y'all are in good company. Yes. So Eric says, thanks. Okay. I hope that answered your question. But Eric, if you're in our Facebook group, don't hesitate to reach out and ask any other questions. If you are not part of our Facebook group, we'd love to have y'all. We have the Profit Podcast online community. If you go to this link right here, it will take you directly to our Facebook group. It's a lot better than like putting the whole like Facebook URL that's super, super long. Come join us in our Facebook group and say, hey, I was watching on YouTube. I was watching on Facebook, and I'm here to learn about whatever your one podcast pain point is, whether it's launching, it's repurposing, it's getting more audience engagement, trying to get more downloads, grow your audience, whatever it is. We have podcasters of all shapes, sizes, like all over the place. And I love our Facebook community. So is there a tone to be set for the podcast in terms of the content and voice? Happy, encouraging, bright, motivational, how to gauge your target audience. So this is a real personal choice, and it evolves over time. I will say that. If you go back, and you can go back all the way to the beginning, I did not go back and change any of my old podcast episodes. Some of them are terrible. And when I say terrible, the audio is terrible in some of my first episodes. And I sound a little robotic. I sound a little monotone. I don't sound as happy and as like I'm thinking of like comfortable, because you can feel that I'm reading from a script, or that I don't really know what I'm doing, or that I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, the interviews are great, but my first solo only shows were like, oh, poor, bless her heart, as we say in Texas. It's like, she don't really know what she's doing. Or, somebody give her like a step in the right direction, because So it evolved over time. And like going back to, what kind of personality traits that you really put in there, it's totally up to you. Are you a happy, encouraging, bright person? Like when you're sitting down talking to someone over coffee, or you're sitting down to, have a glass of wine with someone, or you're talking to your friend, you're talking to your spouse, your partner, your parents, like whoever. I want you to imagine, is this how I would typically show up if I was just having a conversation with someone that I respect, someone that I love, someone that I admire? And that's how I try to show up. And whenever I sit down for my podcast, I'm laughing because I'm imagining myself, like we were talking to Leah earlier, like I got my notes. I'm imagining a brand new podcaster or someone who's been podcasting, because that's my target audience. So I'm imagining that it is just me and that person. And we are talking about the important topic we're talking about that day. And I am just sharing from my heart. I'm sharing my notes. I'm sharing the high points that I wanted to create. And then sometimes that leads to me being silly. Sometimes it leads to, I've had episodes where I try not to cry through them because it was a very emotional topic. And it just really depends on the topic and on the subject matter. But you are the one, like you're the person as the host that sets the tone of the content and of the voice. So you're the one that decides that. And if it's something today, it doesn't mean that you can't change it over time. And I found that it just evolves naturally. Once you keep showing up, you understand your audience better. You understand, like as a content creator, how you can be better, how you want to show up. Because let's just be really honest, there's been some times where I've created a piece of content and I'm like, that was kind of boring. I don't know that I ever want to talk about that again. And then I'll have pieces of content that I'm like, that was okay. It was all right. But then I'll see the downloads like shoot up and I'm like, why did people like this one so much? So I have to go like back to the drawing board and ask my audience, what did you love about this? So just know the tone of your voice, the tone of your content, how you deliver it will evolve and change over time. And I can't tell you how many of my students, so I have a course, it's Profit Podcasting. And I can't tell you how many times someone has launched their podcast, and in the first 3 months of their show, they have been publishing episodes, interacting with their audience, learning what to do. And then they're like, I need to change things. And I'm like, that's okay. I changed my podcast. I changed the format of it in the first, I think, 3 months after it was published. I changed my format of how I delivered certain pieces of content, how I did my music, how I did this. Like it's all evolved and changed over time. And if that happens, it's totally fine. You're normal. It's perfect. It's perfect in the sense that it is exactly who you need to be as a podcaster. So those are my thoughts on that. I hope that it helped. If anybody has any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can DM me. You can send me an email, send me a message. Just reach out and join our free Facebook group. That's where you're going to find more information. We share tips and strategies, and we have great conversations in there. So if Facebook is your thing, come hang out with us. But y'all, that's all I have for you today. Y'all have a fabulous Taco Tuesday. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Bye, y'all.